Finally doing this again, watching more films on the IMDB Bottom 100. My favorite thing to write on this channel, but also the one that takes the most work. So I don't usually do it as often. I usually look for reasons to avoid it unless I have more than 1 week to do it. Although I was a little too eager to make this. Sometime earlier, Bratz was the next thing up. I ended up reading the Wikipedia page and looking through some of the IMDb trivia, but it was a long time since then before I actually got to it, and when I did, it turns out it was not available on Freevee anymore. Which takes us all the way to number 55, Dumb and Dumberer, When Harry Met Lloyd, from 2003. This is going to be hell on my spell check. Also, this made me skip over The Room, which I saw twice at midnight screenings near my college but isn't streaming anywhere. But anyway, back to Dumb and Dumberer. Over 10 years before Dumb and Dumber 2, there was something else to disappoint fans of the original cult classic. Yes, the Wikipedia page says that the first one has a cult following, which is a little weird for a movie that made over $200 million. So, you liked the first one? Well, here's a new one without the involvement of anybody who made it good. But first, we're talking about the original. Story time. Peter and Bobby Farley have been trying to get a movie made for some time until Peter's agent said, "You know what, just make one yourself with your brother." I'm guessing they still had connections because this was wide release and had a lot of known actors in negotiation. They went with a script that they had no involvement in writing at the time, and the first draft had become infamous in the business for being disjointed. After it was rewritten with their involvement, they pitched it under the fake name A Power Tool Is Not a Toy, so that nobody would recognize it. Also, IMDb says that John Hughes wrote the original screenplay but requested his name be taken off the project, but I'm not sure how true that is. Allegedly, the first choices for the two main characters were Gary Oldman as Lloyd and Nicolas Cage as Harry, but of course that didn't happen. Mel Gibson was considered to play himself as Mary's husband since he was at the time a heartthrob, and the joke was that Lloyd could never compare with him. Oh, I think he might have a chance. Chris Elliott and Rob Lowe were also considered for Harry, and Steve Martin and Martin Short both turned down the role of Lloyd. That role instead went to Jim Carrey, who was relatively unknown at the time. The Farrelly brothers, like most people back then, only knew him as the white guy from In Living Color. But then, before filming started, they saw a screening of his breakthrough film Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, and realized that he was God's gift to this movie. Combined with the box office success of Ace Ventura, he was able to get a salary of $7 million, almost half the movie's budget. But Nicolas Cage was still in negotiation to be Harry, until he turned it down to be in Leaving Las Vegas. In comes a wildcard, Jeff Daniels, allegedly considered after the Farrelly brothers recognized him from a Pepto-Bismol commercial.
We didn't just put that on TV, did we?
At the time, he was only known for dramatic roles. Nobody knew if he could pull this off, and they kept no secret about that, by which I mean everybody hated his guts. New Line said hell no, offering Daniels a salary of only $50,000 for the whole movie in the hopes that he would turn it down. His agent said hell no, telling him that it would kill his career, so Daniels decides, let's do this. The day before his costume fitting, he was contacted by 3 separate agents begging him to not do this, saying they could still get him out of the contract. He turned them down. For the first week, he filmed for only 1 day and had no scenes with Carrey. He later found out this week was part of his audition. The studio was keeping a comedy actor on standby to replace him if he messed up, despite Carrey's insistence that he stay because he needed a dramatic actor to bounce off of. But the performance convinced the studio that he was okay, and so did Carrey championing him, and a legendary comic duo was born. According to Peter Farrelly, 15% of the movie was improvised, including the most annoying sound in the world, and a line where he addresses people with big gulps. This last one's interesting because these guys weren't even paid extras. They were just hanging around nearby watching, and the directors just decided to put them in a shot. Jim Carrey had chipped his tooth years before in a school fight, and took out the filling for this movie. Yes, that gap is real. Okay, fine, now to my thoughts on it. Yeah, it's good. Reading the possibly fake behind-the-scenes drama with the actors made me appreciate the casting more. Both of these people were pretty much underdogs for this at one point. But the stars were aligned and they managed to get in anyway, and it's great. They have great chemistry and the dumb lines are delivered perfectly deadpan. Honestly, if it had Nicolas Cage and Jim Carrey, that may have been a little too much. I mean, that would be interesting to watch, definitely, but I don't think the universe could handle that kind of chaotic energy. Carrey was right, he needs somebody more restrained, somebody to bounce off of, a different kind of dumb, and he gets it here, and it works. True to the title, it is a very dumb movie, yet also might have a bit of smarts underneath that. I mean, it must take some cleverness to write funny, stupid stuff like the things these guys say. The dumb lines are really what make it. The antics are nice too, but I guess the deadpan lines are more my sense of humor. Probably the most underrated detail in the movie happens in Harry's scene with Mary. She's the love interest, and Harry thinks they're both in love with each other, and the song that plays over this scene is... I don't know if this is funny, haha, but I'm loving it. But it's the dumbness that really matters, because this movie's selling point is laughing at stupid people. There are 2 trailers for this. One is just a collection of dumb things they say and do in the movie, intercut with quotes about stupidity, and the other is the same thing but with definitions of various synonyms of dumb instead. None of them say anything about what the story is, just funny, stupid people.
If they each had half a brain, they'd still only have half a brain.
We never even find out which one is dumb and which one is dumber, although apparently somebody interpreted the title as both of them are dumber and the criminals who can't tell that they are not agents are the dumb. A critic from Time Out apparently compared this to another movie from the same year about a dumb man, Forrest Gump. He said, unlike that one, this doesn't attempt to romanticize these people. And yeah, that's definitely true. Come to think of it, on paper this would seem kind of mean-spirited. 2 guys who are dumb and we're just supposed to laugh at them for being dumb and not truly sympathize with them. It starts off with both of them losing their jobs, and by the end none of them get the girl and life doesn't get much better. If anybody had a character arc, I must have missed it. And yet it doesn't feel mean-spirited. It just feels like lighthearted, silly fun. Possibly just because it was actually funny. Which is why this, among other movies, made Jim Carrey and his style big in the 90s. And I'm going to interpret the final scene as something that accidentally represents the transition between 80s and 90s comedy. In the 80s, there were a lot of sex comedies that catered to male fantasies and got accused of sexism. At the end of this one, the heroes are confronted with a horny situation that only happens in porn and 80s sex comedies, and they blow it because they're too silly to even realize what's happening, true to that style of comedy. I realize there were probably things that happened to comedy between that, but don't ruin this for me. I'm not as big a fan of this kind of humor as I was when I was a kid. If I ever saw Ace Ventura again, I can't tell if I'd like it or not. But this still held up for me. It's one of Jim Carrey's best comedies that perfectly straddles the line between stupid and genius. So, spoiler alert, this didn't kill Jeff Daniels' career. In fact, it was his most popular film up to that point. It also launched the careers of the Farrelly brothers, and it continued Jim Carrey's quick rise to stardom. This was the 3rd movie he was in that year to open to #1 at the box office, along with Ace Ventura and The Mask. His 3 most well-known comedic performances. Talk about blowing your load early. Surprisingly, it took 20 years to make a sequel, and 9 years before they'd make something to cynically milk this cash cow. Very uncharacteristic of Hollywood.
Before this day is over, they'll break the rules.
Chicks cannot hold their smoke. That's what it is.
Bare their souls.
I'm a nymphomaniac.
Are your parents aware of this?
Take some chances.
Being bad feels pretty good, huh?
And touch each other in a way they never dreamed possible.
Why'd you do that?
Because I knew you wouldn't.
The Breakfast Club.
And now, our feature presentation.
So I can't really find anything on where the Farrelly brothers or the stars of the original were, and since I already put too much effort into shaky research on this topic, I'm just going to presume they were busy or couldn't think of any material for a sequel yet. But that didn't stop the studio. They decided to go the route of the actors can't come back because these are the younger version of the characters. They're in high school now, and this is when they first met. And the only actress to return was Lynn Shay. It took me a little more effort than usual to find out who she is. It turns out she was the woman in that one scene at the beginning who hired Harry to groom her dogs. Now she plays a completely different character who's still a very small role. South Park creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker were at one time hired to write the script but dropped out in 2000, giving their entire salaries back to New Line, but it eventually got made with other writers. Many of the young actors were allegedly hired largely due to being huge fans of the original, but this cast also included actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf, who plays a character named Lewis, which is the same name as his character in Even Stevens, his most well-known role at the time. It was also released on his birthday, June 13th, and takes place in 1986, his birth year. Worst birthday present ever. Okay, fine, a prequel doesn't necessarily need to have the same people involved, and it doesn't need to be compared to a classic original. So with that in mind, this is still really bad. Although, it's a little more watchable than other recent ones on this list. Yes, this series has really lowered my standards in that regard, but this should at least get me back to being somewhat balanced with this kind of video. So, true to the title, it finally answers the question some fans might have been asking. How did Harry meet Lloyd? They met once in the first 15 minutes or so and immediately became friends. That's it. I gotta give credit to another movie I watched for this list, The Flintstones and Viva Rock Vegas, because at least that was fully about Fred meeting Wilma for its whole runtime. Once that's out of the way, we get into the main conflict. Like the first one and its actual sequel, they unknowingly get involved with criminals. The principal of their school, played by Eugene Levy, wants to buy an expensive house for him and his mistress. They hear about a huge grant given to any school with a special needs program, but their school doesn't have that. So they recruit the two idiot students to start a fake one, and those guys recruit even more fake special needs students. They basically do nothing all day, but for some reason even the average intelligence students are surprised at the end when they find out that it's a fraud scheme. And unlike the trailers for the original, the trailer here actually lets the audience know the principal scheme. Way to drop the ball there. It also makes it look a lot hornier, like one of those 80s sex comedies I was talking about earlier. There's a shot of a Porky-style peephole to the girls' locker room from a scene that's very short and very forgettable in the actual movie, and another shot that we'll get into later. But these are pretty much the only truly horny scenes here. There's definitely crude humor, but it's still PG-13 and not instant titillation. Now that that's out of the way, let's get back to the movie. This film opens with a vagina point of view shot. Yeah, it's technically supposed to be Harry being born from his point of view. The movie starts with a black screen and we see the outside world through a growing and shrinking vagina-shaped window that also closes out the movie. That's right, that's the opening and closing shot. And it's still rated PG-13. Eat your heart out, Netflix. Yeah, this movie is technically worse than that other movie with an infamous vagina POV shot, but it's still far less hateable. That isn't saying much, but it's at least harmless for the most part. Plus, it's less than half as long and not nearly as bloated. The main roles are played by Derek Richardson and Eric Christian Olsen, and they actually do a good job. Olsen especially as Lloyd. You'd think the guy having to do a Jim Carrey impression would be the worst part, but this is actually a good impression. At times you can almost be tricked into thinking you're actually watching a younger Jim Carrey. And Richardson is also pretty convincing despite having a bad wig. This time the antics are more funny than the actual lines, but that really says more about the lines than the antics. The dumb things they say are not smartly written enough to be funny. Ironically, I did not laugh a lot at this movie. One of the best antics involves Harry accidentally getting melted chocolate on the walls of a girl's bathroom, and the more he tries to clean it, the worse it gets until there's chocolate everywhere. And of course, it looks like something else. Okay, maybe the rest of the movie lowered my standards. But what really makes this scene is the reaction from the girl's father. The late Bob Saget plays him, and boy does he commit to this scene. Nothing quite captures the magic of cinema quite like the guy from Full House yelling, "There's shit everywhere." If there was a feature-length cut of just him freaking out over fake poop, it would still be much funnier than the actual movie. And it would win every award ever. Is it bad if I personally think it's funnier than the diarrhea scene in the first one? Yeah, that's probably bad. Anyway, back to the trailer. The other edgy, horny scene I mentioned was this.
Girls, there's only one way to settle this. Make out contest.
Mom? Hi, sweetie.
Dumb and Dumberer. When Harry met Lloyd.
But what it fails to mention is that this is from Lloyd fantasizing about girls he has a crush on. Sort of like the fantasy sequence in the first one where everyone acts unnaturally because Lloyd's imagination is dumb. Doesn't make the scene that much less stupid in context, but it helps a little. And yes, this is the same Harry's mom who had the vagina POV at the beginning who is now having a make-out contest with a teenage girl. Did I mention the actress used to be in Playboy? Anyway, I think this is worth mentioning because of how much of a departure this is from the romantic innocence of the fantasy sequence in the original or even in the sequel. Although he's a teenager in this one, so I guess it makes sense. Everyone's horny at that age. He isn't that much less innocent than in the original.
What are you doing? She's a foreign exchange student. She obviously doesn't speak the English. What the fuck?
Okay, there are a few exceptions. Also, near the end it turns out that girl is fluent in English and she just pretends that she isn't for attention. And until that is revealed, everyone just assumes her name is... oh.
What the fuck?
Who says there aren't any good roles for Asian actors? I'm no prude, but I'll just say that there are movie scenes you watch and think, you can't do that today, and then there are others where you're surprised they were able to do it back then. Oh, but don't worry, the movies also addict to special needs kids too. The grant is given by a former special needs kid, and when we actually see him in person, the performance and the way it's written could best be described as...
Are you trying to be funny, or are you actually special?
Although that's actually just an undercover cop pretending to be him. Which brings me to my next point. In the original, the world around the main characters was mostly grounded in reality. Here, that world isn't really much smarter than they are. The plan is stupid. The class is a bunch of students who get in for stupid reasons and is held either in a shed somewhere or at one point the cafeteria kitchen. And it still fools people. The other students are maybe not stupid, but many of them are over the top, which would be okay if the movie fully committed to making them a decent part of the movie's comedy, but really they're just there. And all of this just makes the title characters seem less dumb. Adding to that, there's this one scene where Lloyd steals a polar bear statue from a museum, and we see a little girl at the exhibit ask her mother where it is, and the response was something along the lines of, "He was shot in the face by a hunter, just like your father." I can't even tell if that was funny or not, but it's just so bizarre and nonsensical it just demands some kind of reaction. Also, on an unrelated note, it takes place in the 80s, but the opening credits play Ice Ice Baby from the 90s. I can almost understand when they played a Good Charlotte song at one point because at least that was current at the time, but why a dated 90s song? So despite some reviews that may have possibly been less than glowing, this movie was financially successful but made way less than its predecessor. And we never saw the franchise again until 2014 with Dumb and Dumber 2, distributed by Universal instead of New Line this time. Hey, that's the second time in a row a follow-up to a non-Universal IMDB Bottom 100 movie was distributed by Universal. It brings back everything people loved about the original, and people still didn't like it. I decided to watch it for the first time and yeah, it kinda sucks. It's dumb, but not nearly as funny. Also, it really turns these guys into total dicks.
Dr. Barbara? The lady doctor? Seriously? Lady doctor, that always cracks me up. Yeah, doctor doing the laundry maybe. Am I right? What the fuck?
Okay, could somebody please reassure me that I'm not a prude? It feels like an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia if the writers forgot that we're supposed to hate the characters, and also forgot that they had to be funny. Remember that funny bit with the blind kid and the bird? Well, they call back to it in a way that's so cruel and mean-spirited that it's just disturbing. And did I mention the entire subplot where Lloyd wants to date a girl who's believed to be Harry's daughter? But it's still funnier than this, although I think the blonde comparison works with these two movies as well. Dumb and Dumberer is a worse movie in every way, but at least it wasn't cruel or mean-spirited. Oh, and it shows the couple's parents and mentions certain details about their high school life. Details that contradict what Dumb and Dumberer establishes. Dumb and Dumber 2 effectively erased Dumb and Dumberer from canon, so I guess it can't be all bad. Although quality and humor aside, I'd personally prefer the canon that features the prequel and the original, because it's less depressing than finding out 20 years later their lives did not get better and now they're dicks to everyone. So who is the dumberer in this movie? I'm going to interpret it as everyone in the movie is dumb, but the movie itself is dumberer. This movie was a warning to let everyone know not to make a sequel to a Jim Carrey movie without Jim Carrey. We should have listened earlier.
My house is full of shit! He shit everywhere! Look what he did! He shit all over the wall!
Yeah, let's put that here. Number 10. Breaking the top 10. What an honor.